So September 11th is a day that changed our country and this community forever. On this day, four commercial airliners were hijacked and flown into the World Trade Center in New York City, the Pentagon here in our backyard, and the fourth plane crashed in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. About 3,000 people were killed in what is known as the deadliest terrorist attack in the world. The tragedy of 9/11 tested the United States in many ways. It caused us to question what it means to be American. It tested our ability to rebuild and has caused a splinter in both domestic identity and diplomatic relationships that are playing themselves out to this very day. Today, we pause to remember the valor of those we lost and those who rose to meet the moment. In the aftermath of the attack, local leaders from the Community Foundation and Northern Virginia Family Services came together with our donors and partners to launch the Survivors Fund to help victims and families directly affected by the attack on the Pentagon. Over the span of 7 years, the fund raised $25 million and helped 1,051 individuals to access services and the support they needed to achieve long-term financial and emotional stability. In remembrance of the 20th anniversary of 9/11, we are hosting today's session to reflect on the past and to continue to chart a new future. We've invited Dan Mayers, Board of Trustee Emeriti, for opening remarks, and former President and CEO of the Greater Washington Community Foundation, Terri Lee Freeman, to share her experiences and reflections and lessons learned. So before I turn it over to Dan, I'd like us to just pause for a brief moment of silence and remembrance. Thank you. Dan, I'd like to turn it over to you for opening remarks. Unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I don't see myself on the screen though.
We see you, Dan.
You see me? All right, I don't see it. Okay, good. I don't have to see myself. Well, as you know, when that plane hit the Pentagon, almost 200 people were immediately killed and many, many more seriously wounded. And almost immediately after the event, through an article, well, through the Washington Post, money started pouring in great amounts. I'd say probably $10–15 million within a couple of weeks. And it eventually totaled, as Tonia said, almost $25 million. The Community Foundation itself had obviously not staffed up to do the sort of work that was required. And it had no experience in this. Some board members had some worries about liabilities. And so it was quickly decided by Terri and others to set up some sort of semi-separate organization that would be housed at the foundation, and the foundation would do the back office work. But the organization became known as the Survivors Fund for the Pentagon Victims, and I was asked to chair that effort. I should say at the outset that the two people who really made this place work for 7 years were Kathy Welpley and Terri Lavoie. Terri is with us now, and without them, day to day for 7 years, this operation would have never gotten off the ground. We decided initially on a model based on the experience in Oklahoma City. And it's very important to understand this because it was very different. Unlike the other funds, we made no cash payments whatsoever to anybody. Nobody received a cent. Instead, we decided to pay approved expenses that people had directly to the people who provided the services. So no one got a check. And so the three of us then wrote up a loose constitution of sorts. We had no idea what the needs would be at that time, how long it would last, how soon the money would be spent. We were in the dark. The eligibility, we decided, to anybody who would be receiving help would only be through social services. And we contracted with the Northern Virginia Family Services, Stephanie Berkowitz, who's with us today. And that we had at times 12 full-time social workers working solely on this. It was by far the greatest annual expense for the Survivors Fund, was the wonderful work the Northern Virginia Family Services provided. And it was an uncomfortable role for social workers, because we asked them to do more than what they're used to. We asked them to recommend and make decisions about people's needs. And they morphed into that. And it was a very difficult transition for them, obviously, to do that. We had almost, as Tonia said, we had more than 1,000 clients in 45 states. You have to understand that the clients weren't just people who were injured or families of the deceased, but people like a grandmother who was dependent upon checks, who lived out in Oregon from somebody who was killed. So there were people all over the country who became clients. We set up a two-tiered system within the Survivors Fund. We had a governance committee, which was made up of about 8 or 10 of us, which met periodically and frequently. And we had a distributions committee, which did the really hard lifting. They met, and this is hard to believe, think about a volunteer effort, every 2 weeks for 7 years to approve and consider the recommendations of the social workers from Northern Virginia Family Services. And Clarice Walker, bless her heart, led that effort on the distributions committee. And nothing, of course, turned out the way we guessed. And that was the great experience and the great learning. Contrary to our initial belief, the immediate needs were substantial. These other funds that were set up, this huge federal fund that you remember and things like that, didn't really get off the ground for a year or more. And there were people out there who needed rent for the next month, tuition for their kids, utilities, etc. So we found ourselves, despite what we had hoped, needing and really filling the gap and expending a good amount of our resources in the early years for rent and tuition, mortgages, utilities, as I said. And then, of course, over the years, the needs shifted. They shifted from these immediate things like rent and tuition to health, mental health. By the end, an awful lot of our payments were for mental health help. And we found one of our lessons here was we did very well in keeping what I call our constitution, our original document, very loose, so that it could really react to these changes that were unanticipated, but very real. We did wonderful annual reports through Janice Kaplan, who is, I hope, with us today. And they're a great resource for the future, of course, and everybody has them at the community foundations. More important, we had independent evaluations of what we did. And what they showed was quite amazing. By far the highest satisfaction rate with our model and our execution. That is the model where people didn't get direct money, but their bills were paid directly. Then why was that? I think it's because no one was promised anything. There was no backbiting about who got more than somebody else. Nobody knew how we treated anybody else. And again, the only disbursement was to pay bills. And moreover, of these 1,000 clients, I believe, Stephanie can correct me, about 50% of them only received social services and no payment of expenses whatsoever. So the social services became very, very important. And they were provided to people, not only locally, as I said, but all over the country. Now, toward the end, there was a windup, of course. What do you do when you end up from $25 million to $2 or $3 million? And we made some really, I think, sensible decisions there as well. We set aside some money for college funds for high school kids. We endowed funds for certain people who we picked out who had lifetime needs, whose problems weren't going to go away, crippling injuries, etc. And we endowed funds for certain people at the end. It was really, I don't want to say more, I can answer questions. It was just a fantastic voyage for everyone involved. I know it was for me. I'll close by citing Ann Wexler, who I hope some of you know who she was. She was a legendary Washington dealmaker and a public relations counsel. And she said to her, with all her experience, it was the most meaningful experience of her life. And I think that really sums it up very well. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you for your continued commitment and service to the Greater Washington Community Foundation and our broader community. It's my pleasure to introduce to some, because some of our new team members are on the line, and just present to others who've known Terri for a very long time. Terri Freeman, who is the former president and CEO of the Greater Washington Community Foundation. Terri, I always brag that you served on how well you served this community and this community foundation, growing the foundation from about 50 million when you joined to about 400 million when you left. Just an amazing track record and incredibly large shoes to fill. And thank you for your guidance and mentorship to me directly right now, sitting in this role. It's a pleasure to invite you to the conversation. Terri is now the executive director of the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland African American History and Culture. But we're going to spend some time today just reflecting on the events of 9/11 and the Community Foundation's response and involvement. Welcome, Terri.
Thank you, Tonia. Thank you.
So let's start, Terri. It's not an uncommon question to ask. Where were you when the 9/11 attacks happened? You want to paint a picture for us for that day?
Sure. I was actually pretty much just getting out of my car. We were located at the time at 16th and M Streets. Our offices were on 16th and M. And I was leaving my parking lot. My parking lot was on L Street, between 15th and 16th and L Street. So I was walking, headed to the office, when I heard that something had occurred at the World Trade Center. What I remember that morning, first off, everybody says it was just the most beautiful day. It was this crystal clear blue sky day. And what I remember when I was hearing about it was that everybody was on a cell phone at the time. Everyone was talking, or trying to at least talk on their cell phone. So I was just trying to make it into the building. And as I was coming into the building, Kenny Empson, who was our CFO at the time, was leaving the building to go meet with a donor. Not certain what exactly had happened. And so that was my morning, getting into the office when I heard about what had happened.
Great. Terri, Dan started to give us the backdrop around kind of how the Community Foundation got involved. Would you mind walking us through that a little bit?
Sure. So I think it's important to first talk about, what kind of did happen when we got into the office and we were learning what was happening. at the time, my assistant was on the telephone with someone at the Pentagon and remembered hearing a plane had hit both of the towers. And as she was on the call, the telephone went dead. And that is when we learned that there was another plane that had hit the Pentagon. The building actually required that we evacuate. And my concern was ensuring that everybody who was in the office could get home safely, and not knowing what was going on, clearly understanding that there was some type of attack occurring, very nervous about people getting on the metro. So we actually had staff, as much as possible, kind of pair up and drive each other to their location so people didn't have to get on the metro. I unfortunately cannot remember the staff person's name. I'm sure Silvana probably could remember the gentleman who was riding with me because he was up in Silver Spring, but he chose, he was going to have to take the metro. I said, don't take the metro, we'll go together. Of course, everything was locked up, right? And so we're driving up 16th Street. There are sirens going off everywhere. And we see an ambulance coming up behind the car. It's packed on 16th Street. We're trying to make space. There wasn't quite enough space. I ended up getting sideswiped by an ambulance on the driver's side. So I was so happy he was with me because I was totally rattled between the nerves of what had happened and then being hit by literally sandwiching in the side of my car. I was just totally rattled. So we get him safely where he needed to be. I finally get home. And not long after, looking at these images, because I hadn't seen what had happened until I actually got home, I got a telephone call from Julie Rogers at the Meyer Foundation. And she and I began to talk about the fact that we knew that there was, we had gotten a call from the New York Community Trust, I think it was, who was establishing a fund. And we realized that, people were going to support New York. We weren't certain we were going to get our fair share, frankly, here in Washington if we depended on that. So Julie and I started that conversation that day. The next day, we got on the phone with the Washington Post and said, we really think we need to have something that is dedicated to the Pentagon victims and survivors. And they were in agreement. They made the decision that they would, in the Sunday paper, run an editorial that said they were going to be supporting the Survivors Fund that was established at the Community Foundation. And we thought, okay, maybe this fund will raise somewhere between $5 and $7 million. Our first corporate gift was from Fannie Mae, and Fannie Mae's gift was $5 million.
Wow.
And we knew then, this is something that's going to be really big. And I remember Kathy Welpley and I trying to adjust what we thought our projections might be for the size of this fund. We really just had no idea. But as Dan mentioned, the money really just started pouring in. And it was the impetus of the Washington Post saying that, actually, that we need to actually support this fund at the Community Foundation. And at that point, Tonia, we were just collecting money. We had no idea how we were going to distribute it at that time. We just knew that we were collecting money.
Terri, you also shared in the green room that this happened right around the time as the anthrax scare.
Yes. So it's important that I also give credit to who was my board chair at the time, and that was Larry Huff. And this fund would not have been able to move in the rapid way that it did had it not been for Larry and his trust and faith in the staff's ability to do the right thing, because things were changing so quickly that had we had to check every minute of everything that we needed to do with the board, we wouldn't have gotten it done. And so he really did empower the staff to be able to move forward in getting things done and allowing us to report back as we could. But yes, at the same time as the September 11th situation, the anthrax crisis came online, and we were being told that we should not be opening mail that we did not recognize, with handwriting that we were not familiar with. And literally, and Silvana can attest to this, we were getting bins of mail that was from handwriting that we didn't, know who these people were, where it was from. And I remember at one point, Larry saying to me, well, there are these devices where you can put your hands in this box and you can open the mail without actually having to be exposed. And I was like, no, Larry, that's too complicated. I think we're just gonna have to take the risk and open the mail as we can. And it was really an all hands on deck type of activity. Everybody was opening letters and sorting mail during that time. I would have to say that the upside of this was the bonding that occurred with the staff, because we were all in this together and none of us knew any more than the next person how this was going to turn out.
Yeah. We were talking also, Terri, about the role of the Northern Virginia Family Services, and just wondered if we should just reflect on, and Dan began this, some of the needs of the families who were impacted.
Well, let me say this, and I'm not the best person to answer what the needs of the families were, because I wasn't doing the day-to-day, but I want to mention that I remember the moment when Northern Virginia Family Services name came up. We had made a trip to the Pentagon with the Red Cross to see the damage. And it was really difficult to go see that. And Kathy Welpley and I came back in a cab together, and we were talking about, what these needs were going to be, because our goal was not just about, as Dan said, it wasn't about giving people money. It was really more about helping people heal, helping them heal in whatever way they needed to. And at some point, Kathy and I looked at each other and at the same time said, Northern Virginia Family Services. It was the organization that we knew would be able to deliver on what was necessary to be done for these families. And while I cannot recall the specific needs, they were varied, from health needs to, as Dan said, income replacement for rent and things like that. There were needs around retraining people because they could no longer serve in the positions that they had because of the trauma associated with that. But one of the cases that I do recall, because it was so moving to me, was a family that had a memorial made and I can't remember exactly where the memorial was placed, but that was what they needed to heal from this tragedy. And I think the beauty of the Survivors Fund was that we let the families lead. We didn't tell the families what they needed. The families told us what they needed. And it did really prove, I think, the importance of a case management approach to providing services to people who are experiencing severe trauma. I think it was a beautiful way to prove the incredible services that Northern Virginia Family Services provided on a daily basis.
So I want to acknowledge Stephanie Berkowitz again, who's on the call with us. who is the president and CEO of the Northern Virginia Family Services and a strong partner to the Community Foundation to this day. She also wrote an op-ed that we'll share in the chat. Oh, did you already put it in the chat? Yes, I think Savannah did. That was prepared. Stephanie will create the opportunity towards the end, if it's okay, for you to offer any reflections as well. Terri, I want to transition just a bit to, you were president and CEO during a time of 9/11, during the economic crises of 2008 and 2011. You've seen several crises hit our region. Can you talk about generally, and I've had my own experiences since I've been here at the Community Foundation too, but just about the role of philanthropy during a crisis now and into the future, then, now, and into the future?
So sure, Katrina was in there over the course of that time as well. One of the things that the Survivors Fund allowed was for us to document the process. And we were able to produce, and Terri Lavoie probably knows the name of I'm sorry, my mind is like Swiss cheese. I'm older and somewhat wiser, but my memory's not as sharp. But there was a document that we produced that would help other community foundations and other philanthropies actually be able to do this work, because unfortunately, we knew that tragedies would continue to occur. Disasters would continue to occur. And thankfully, unfortunately, we had the Oklahoma City to be able to use as a model. Going forward, I think, where we are now, Tonia, with COVID,
yeah.
Where we are now with our kind of social environment is a very, very difficult situation. Yeah. And philanthropy has the ability, in my estimation, to really help, or frankly, to really hinder our ability to move forward. And I think the goal has to be, in looking at working with nonprofit or social profit organizations, however you want to call them, allowing the organizations to guide the philanthropy, not the other way around. We can't have the tail, which in this instance is philanthropy, wag the dog. And over the course of my work in philanthropy, I would often emphasize with nonprofits that they serve in a very powerful position, but they have to be willing to use their power. And in this COVID environment where things are literally changing, we were having the conversation about seeing ourselves in this situation yet again in September of 2021, when we thought we would be done with this. It is really critical that philanthropy extend itself as a partner, but as one that is allowing itself to be, as I said, guided by those nonprofits that are delivering the service. The other thing I think is that we just have to plan in our communities for these things to happen. They are going to continue to happen, unfortunately. We're looking at all of these climate disasters, one on top of the other. I remember when we were talking about disaster fatigue and donor fatigue years ago. If they had fatigue then, they're really done for right now, given everything that's going on. So I think it really is that this kind of needs to become a part of the work of philanthropy. This needs to be its own thing, that we are preparing for these situations. And one of the things that Stephanie mentioned in her article around understanding how underrepresented communities are affected, how they feel about coming forward, and how we need to be more sensitive and more observant and more recognizing of those situations. So, you know, I don't have a crystal ball, but what I do know is that it's going to continue. These things are going to continue to occur, and our communities are going to have to be prepared.
Thank you. Thank you, Terri. I want to make sure that we create some time to open it up and to hear from some of the other voices around the table. Terri, your name has been mentioned many times. I really would love to, to hear a reflection from you. I want to invite you in, and I am noticing, Toby, the question in the chat box, and I'll come to that in just a minute. And Stephanie, I'll invite you in as well.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Thank you. I become speechless so much, and for Stephanie and Silvana to like find me speechless is and Terri Freeman and Dan is shocking. But you know, we didn't know better in some ways, and we were together doing something, and we just kept moving forward. And it's so great to hear all the stuff, and in my life today. I helped open up a free clinic for uninsured adults. I have no medical background, and then COVID hit. So, and things that I picked up from Survivors Fund and the work have just sustained the work that I do in the community. And I think that the work that others do in the community. Dan is my talisman in always saying, what problem are you trying to solve? This loose constitution he referred to with Survivors Fund was, what are we trying to achieve? And let's not stray from that and get over involved in details in the house. These details we need to have our constitution and our vision to go forward. And that's what he brought to this. Terri, in so many ways, all the time, it's the community organizations, the needs, and that's how, this clinic I work with was built. The community drove what it needed. And then with the learning about the art of social work, which I didn't appreciate till coming on. And that's what Stephanie Berkowitz and Northern Virginia Family Service, this Survivors Fund was important because it didn't say we could compensate people for what happened to them. We could only help them recover. And we wanted to do that well. And using the Oklahoma City model and the gifts of what social work is, and an organization like Northern Virginia Family Service who does it so well, that was the key to our success. And then of course, there's like the staff at the Community Foundation, like Savannah. I don't think I would have survived without Savannah and the corner of our insanity, physically in the office. And Kathy Webley, who, it was changing. It was dealing, as we were staff, dealing with people's grief. And I wasn't prepared for that. And didn't do it well in the beginning. And it was Stephanie and Northern Virginia Family Service that helped contextualize that. But being able to walk into Kathy Welby's office and have my mind explode, and then before I knew it, I was walking out with my sword sharpened and ready to go on. That was just, those are overly personal in some ways, but it speaks to the leadership that the Community Foundation had and continues to have. And of course, there's obviously the stories of the individuals that you take with you, but their struggle was what we went through in the going down a dark road is nothing compared to the dark road that obviously they've been walking. And I do want to say thank you so much for allowing me to take a moment out of my day-to-day life that I don't reflect upon this and putting this work in the community and in context. So thank you.
Thank you, Terri. Thank you. Stephanie?
Yeah, sorry. Janice started off the conversation around being the most meaningful experience in her career, and there's a lot of accolades and agreement with that, and absolutely, and it will forever be. Both because of the context and the construct of the work, but also because of the people on this screen here today and those whose names have been mentioned. It just, what an unbelievable privilege to work with such a diverse group of minds coming around the table, Terri, you spoke often during that time around building the bike while we were riding it, or riding the bike while we were building it, and boy, were we riding so fast. And to have such the privilege of working with folks that were constantly evolving the way that we were thinking. And I said earlier about being a learning organization from day one through year 7, it was so important. And so when I think about the construct of the Survivors Fund, it's all the things that have been mentioned, and it also is a model not just for the way you help a community recover after trauma, but also how you bring partners together and build something in the most transparent, supportive, make mistakes and it's okay kind of way, and continue to learn and grow. And Dan talked about the demonstrated impact that this program had, and it's truly unparalleled in my mind in so many different ways. Dan and Terri, you both mentioned healing, and I think in a society where trauma can be both so personal and so systemic and so widespread, that thinking about the role of healing, an organization's role in supporting one's healing is monumental and fundamental to how you create a program and deliver services, because then it is really about the individual healing and not a prescriptive way in which you deliver a service, but you're really then getting at the root cause of what brings someone to a place of need in the first place. So truly a privilege. And the last thing I'll mention, because it's such an important conversation in today's world where we talk about fatigue around the pandemic and the isolation and the increasing rates of abuse and child neglect and all the things that are happening in the world today, and are being exacerbated, that were already there and disproportionately impacting different communities, is the importance of self-care. Yeah. And it was the Community Foundation, Terri and Kathy and Dan and the leaders of the Survivors Fund who supported Northern Virginia Family Service in creating such an important part of the programming, was supporting the staff doing the work to help mitigate that secondary traumatization, the vicarious traumatization, to help our staff continue to show up every single day so that we can get out there and help the community. And we talk about health and well-being in the community today, and that was really, it was pioneering, and it was such a gift that Terri and Dan, that you saw and recognized how important that was for us collectively to continue to be able to do the work. So I think all of us could probably talk all day about what an incredible experience and the lessons learned. So I will stop. Thank you for the opportunity. I can't believe I'm here with you, Terri and Dan. It's been so long, and such a you're filling my heart today.
Thank you, Stephanie. I want to make sure that we create just a very brief moment to see if there are any team members who were here at the time who wanted to say something before I give it to Terri Freeman to have the last word.
I'll let Kathy Matthews start.
I just remember walking into the office and Terri walking in and tearing up, saying something has happened, something really bad has happened. And I think it was a board meeting that same day. It was a very tough time. One other thing that I remember is the donations that started coming in, and opening up the mail and children sending in donations, emptying their penny banks. Mm-hmm. That was so touching. Yeah. So I don't want to tear up again. I'm a crybaby. But those are some of the times that I remember.
Kathy, I'm so glad you remembered. That was the first memory I had, with all the envelopes during anthrax in the conference room, all hands on deck, me freaking out, Terri getting mad at me. Freaking out about anthrax. and
I
scaring
wasn't going to
everybody.
say anything, Silvana.
No, I
But
love it.
since you
And
did,
I
yes,
know.
the whole
I got in
thing
big
with
trouble. I know.
the whole thing with Larry Huff was because of you. So
I just wanted to,
I bought the machine, right? And then, but the beauty of opening those envelopes and little kids' letters and their coins, putting their allowance in there. I also want to say that the day 9/11, I was out of the country and I called Terri. I called you the next day from Italy. And I asked how you were doing. And you said you were fine. And I asked how everybody was. And I said, where are you? And this is the next day. And Terri said, I'm in the office. And I could not believe what I was hearing. Terri was downtown at 16th and M the next day. She said, I'm in the office setting up a fund to help the survivors and people directly affected by the Pentagon attack. And that's that type of leadership. I've never seen anything like that in my life. And it was an honor to work with Dan and Terri Lavoie, who was on call 24/7, dealing with trauma 24/7 and managing it with the biggest heart I've ever seen, and also incredible courage and humor in the middle of trauma. And she continues to do that at the Colmore Clinic on the front lines of the pandemic. So I'm very, very moved to be here with all of you today.
I just wanted to add a story, because I think you can't emphasize enough the appreciation that the clients had for the work that the fund did and the foundation did. Terri and Kathy, about once a year, would really lean on me and say, Dan, we have to have a meeting with people who want to talk about their experiences with the fund. They somehow got me in a room, and you sit with the chair backwards and you pretend you're very, very intense. And the people that come are the people who are the least satisfied, obviously, with their services. And even then, with those people in the room, with some of their legitimate gripes, there were other people who traveled from, I remember, South Carolina and Georgia, simply to come up and tell us personally how we have changed their lives and made their lives possible. And I think I'll never forget that, sitting in the room and having those people take that trip simply to give us that message. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. This has been incredibly, interesting to hear back on what happened, not having been at the Community Foundation at the time, but just reflecting even on some of our more recent experiences with the current crisis. Very different crisis, but Terri, I think you said it well. Part of the work of our foundation, especially for where we sit and where we serve, has to be around crisis response ongoing, because there's going to be something else, whether it's a global pandemic, a national occurrence, or always something that's surrounding the nation's capital. And so I appreciate you saying that, and I'll share that it's been part of our strategic planning conversations. Like, how do we think about the next crisis? How do we prepare for it, set up for it, fund it in advance? There's the beauty of being in the center of when these tragic things happen is that we get to see, the best of humanity, because people want to give, they want to participate, they want to volunteer, they want to organize in a way that's, acute and special. And we have the opportunity to participate. There's a question ongoing about the effort led by Chuck Bean and the capacity fund. Terri, do you want to speak to that? I don't know anything about that one.
That was there were so many people working to kind of fill the puzzle and playing different roles, different pieces of the puzzle. in this situation that was facing us. And Chuck established a fund that was focused on the nonprofit sector, because our fund was focused on individuals. And there was a definite need to build capacity for the organizations that were providing services, right? And there were, there was kind of an economic slump after September 11th, and people contributing the majority of the funding to the individuals, less funding going to organizations. And that is what that fund was targeted to do. I will say that we worked closely as a very collaborative community during that time. I felt like I was constantly on the road, if you will, talking about all of the things that we were learning. It was kind of like real time conversations about what we were doing, what we were learning, where things were changing, and so much good, as you can see in the chat, so many good reports and what have you came out of that period of time that are still relevant today for organizations as they do this work. Let me tell one other story that comes to mind for me in knowing the stress that people were undergoing. Stephanie spoke of self-care. And one of the things that we did for the staff, because I was very concerned about the fact that everybody else was being able to move away from September 11th as time went on. But we weren't. We were in it. We were doing this every day. And for Stephanie and for Terri Lavoie and for Kathy Welpley, that continued for 7 years, right? Always in it. So early on, we established our own self-care for employees, and we set up seated massages in the conference room for employees just to take a minute to be able to get a break, to get a breather. It wasn't much, but it was something. And it was so important to me because the stress of what we were dealing with at work, we were just taking it back home with us. And we couldn't really move away from it the way some people could.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Any other quick questions, remarks before we close the session for the day? Any other memories that we want to share or bring up?
The chat box is hot with thank yous to Dan Mayers for being our supporter for all these decades. Just wanted to say it out loud.
Thank you so much.
And I'm just acknowledging the role of volunteers. I mean, I think that's a very important lesson for us, as a community foundation in our current iteration to reflect back on, to really think through how we use our volunteers more actively, more just differently when it comes
Tonia,
to, yeah.
I think that it did really illustrate, as I said, how important your board is.
Mm-hmm.
Had we not had a strong board with strong leaders like Larry, like Dan, to be able to, like Ann Wexler, like Clarice, to tap into, who were at every bit as dedicated as the staff who were opening envelopes in the conference room. This was hard work. This was difficult. I think George Vredenberg was a part of the committee as well. And they stuck with it. And they provided incredible service. And it truly was an honor and a privilege to be able to serve in this capacity. And I think it's probably strengthened all of us to be able to continue to do good work in a lot of different areas.
Thank you, Terri. Janice, I see that you came on camera, and I'm noticing that you're driving, but I don't know if you wanted to chime in here safely, please.
I'm in a car with other folks, so I'm not sure how well you can hear me, but I just am so grateful to be with all of you, to have this time to reflect, and to be surrounded by so many of you who have been my role models for all this time, for the last 20 years. And this was my introduction to the Community Foundation 20 years ago, this month. And I've been your biggest fan ever since then. So thank you to all of you who work as volunteers and as staff through the Community Foundation. I just appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Janice. And so I'll close by just saying unless there's something else, I don't want to short it. We still have 5 minutes. So if there's another remark, I want to make sure that we create the space and time for it. Terri, any final words, thoughts from you?
Just thank you. Thank you for doing this, Tonia. It's great to see everybody. I wish we could all be in a room and hug each other and, actually be in each other's presence, but this is the next best thing. So thank you for doing this.
Our pleasure. And thank you. Thanks to all of you for your service, 20 years ago in responding again to what was one of the greatest American tragedies, and for the work that you each continue to do every day. Those of you who were part of the Community Foundation at one point, those my colleagues who are still here at the Community Foundation, and for our new team members, our peers in philanthropy, we just really appreciate that we continue to build on the foundation that was set all these many years ago when it comes to responding to the important issues, crises, needs of our community ongoing.